We're live.
Okay, welcome back, everybody. We're going to spend the next 20 minutes on sports betting, which was a bill that passed, a study bill that passed the Senate last year. And we're going to revisit that topic as an economic development tool. People talk about millions of dollars we're losing in revenue as a result of not legalizing this, and many states are joining the bandwagon quickly in terms since the Supreme Court decision. So I'm going to let Tucker Anderson walk us through what happened a couple of years ago, what I'm suggesting we add to this bill, it's not radical, Tucker was with us for about a half hour about a month ago, gave us some background. If you recall, we had asked for a report. He'll tell us in terms of, I can't remember, we had something passed the Senate, didn't pass the House. We did mandate a report from Legislative Council. It's been significantly delayed. It's not done yet, right? But we've heard parts and bits and pieces of it already from Tucker. So I guess I would break it up this way. 5 minutes of the history of this issue nationally, and then 5 minutes of the history of the past legislative activity, and then 5 minutes or so on the new proposal. Okay.
Good morning, everyone. Tucker Anderson, Office of Legislative Counsel. Happy to be here in person for the first time in 2 years, I believe.
It's good to have you. It means we're doing something really cutting edge.
So I'll meld together the brief history of how this has been rolled out nationally, some of the discussion of the study that is mostly but not completely finished by this point from Leg Council and JFO. So starting from that point, prior to 2013, there were effectively only 4 states that offered sports wagering in the United States. One used what's known as gaming control board regulatory model. That was Nevada. That has become known as the Nevada model as it has spread through the United States. The other 3 states used effectively a state-controlled lottery-based model where sports wagering was integrated into the state's lottery system. Since that time, and since the Murphy v. Brown Supreme Court decision that overturned the PASPA law, the Professional Amateur Sports Protection Act,
Right.
it has spread rather quickly through the states. When S59, which is the first bill that Senator Sorokin was talking about, passed the Senate in 2020, there were 15 states that had some form of regulated sports wagering within their territorial limits. That has 15. That has expanded to well beyond 30, and the count is constantly changing because of that rascal Florida, where they recently legalized sports wagering and then had their regulated sports market determined to be in violation of federal law and is currently on pause.
I wish most of what Ford did was determined to be violating.
No comment. So that's the rollout in history, the major policy points.
That's 59 study bill.
S59 was a study bill.
Was it a legislative study? I mean, was it were legislators supposed to be on the study?
Yes. So S59, as it passed the Senate, created a legislative study committee. It was a mixture. It had the Attorney General, the Commissioner of Liquor and Lottery, the Commissioner of Taxes, the Secretary of State, Secretary of Commerce and Community Development, 2 members of the Senate, and 2 members of the House. The directive was to look at essentially 7 areas of the sports betting world. First, studies carried out by other states concerning a number of areas, including legalization and taxation, laws enacted by other states to legalize, tax, and regulate, potential models for legalizing and regulating, potential models for legalizing and regulating online sports betting specifically, including advantages and drawbacks, potential tax and fee structures, and potential restrictions or limitations on the types of sports that may be bet on, including restrictions that may be imposed on participant age, amateur status,
So,
kind of the integrity stuff.
so why don't you tell us about the language that's been handed out here for the Department of Liquor Law, sports betting market protection proposal and recommendation. And I guess where I'd like to go with your testimony is, are these what happened in S59 and what's being proposed here, are they compatible? Because my goal, given the short time frame we have now, is I would like to hit the ground running next year if the House goes along. So maybe we can do both at the same time. And so we develop knowledgeable legislators in this area going into January. So tell us what's in this, just tell us about this legislative study.
Yes, so the study section you have in front of you would ask DLL to commission a study from an independent researcher looking at a 5-year market analysis. And this would be using the research that's already been done as a basis. So not looking necessarily at the statutory framework or the existing revenue models, but instead looking at what is Vermont's potential market under a list of criteria. And when I say market, it's a loose term here because it's not strictly the financial market. It's also what resources does Vermont have to protect and leverage as a part of this regulatory model. There are essentially 7 components that the market analysis would consider. Essentially the number of platform providers or retailers that should be operating in the state. So that would be a scale showing the legislature, if you have this number of operators, this is the potential revenue, this is the potential impact on the number of players spread between each pool. And that has a tremendous impact on the potential handle and value of acquiring a license in Vermont. The number of platform providers or retailers that may operate in the state at any time, covered that a bit. The type of licenses that may be issued and related fees, the scope and subjects of the active wagering market, the use of official or verified data sources. That's something I touched upon the last time I came in as a growing area. There's 2 states that actually license data providers in this context. The requirement for integrity or responsible gaming fees, something that has come up. The selection of tax rates or revenue sharing agreements. And within each of these, there's a lot under each of these criteria spelling out what has to be
Usually
studied.
that last one is of particular interest in terms of generating revenue to the state. How is that different from what we would be mandating the legislators to come up with recommendations on?
It may not be different. And the JFO analysis that has been done as part of our study does look at what tax rate and potential handle mean for state revenue. The issue is that numbers actually have to be plugged in, right? So you have to have an identified range of tax rates that you want to work with, and decisions have to be made upstream about the type of model you're going to use, how many operators are going to be available, because that all affects the pool of revenue that you're then going to be taxing.
So I don't want to overkill this. I want to, in the ideal world, I want to be really ready if we can't do something this year to be ready to go next year and not have to start developing this whole thing in January, have all the information we need. It sounds like we will, but I'm concerned that maybe we'll have more than that. As you're saying, JFO is also working on this, and numbers do we need? We haven't seen the report, so I don't know whether we need this or this is additive or is it duplicative or is it both?
The language in S59 pairs closely with what we've done in the studies. It's very close. The significant difference is that, at least for legislative council, we can't make policy recommendations within the study. So the sections that I've written are purely looking at, here's a comprehensive overview of the statutory and legal frameworks in each of the legalized markets. Do with it what you will.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's important to, I think, all of us. I think in terms of educating legislators, developing champions and ambassadors for this issue, that has its own value, even though maybe in this context, we don't have to peel back the onion and ask a lot of questions because it's already in the report and we can start talking about it. So maybe don't need as much meetings. But the question is on the market analysis that I'm prepared to suggest a significant amount of money to get this right to put in because it will return itself in spades. Is that necessary?
That would depend on what type of testimony a legislative study committee could bring in on this issue. If the legislative study committee could bring in expert testimony on each of these subject areas, then study you have in front of you would be duplicative.
Well, let me put it this way. Maybe I missed something. Is the stuff that we would get from this market analysis pretty much already in your JFO study?
Some components are, and that's specifically the tax and revenue issues. There's also a comprehensive fee breakdown and analysis in the study for each of the states that shows an entire fee table for what they're doing. Outside of those components, the study doesn't have any specific recommendations, and we certainly did not look at a 5-year forecast, for example, for potential revenue in each year and growth from operators. And the reason, again, is that you have a distinction between models where you're using a contractual relationship between the state and the platform provider, and models where you have an open market with a license application process and then a fee and a tax associated with it.
There's obviously something to be said for one of us standing up and saying to the Senate, you already passed this, so let's just move on, or just do the summer study again. And we'll also have the benefit of your report. So it's a little more complicated when we say we want $100,000 for based study. Think that through. What else would you like to share?
Well, did the Department of Liquor and Lottery, do they have recommendations for how they want to structure
They
this?
would like to sign the bill tomorrow.
Yeah, I was gonna say,
Right.
they're ready to go.
So, yeah, I mean,
But there are a lot of different variables here.
yeah,
And we might disagree with the
Okay.
Department of Liquor and Lottery's approach to this.
right,
I mean, I think we're all on this, well, I shouldn't speak for anybody else, but I'm on the same page as the administration,
Mhm.
wanting to see this happen,
Mhm.
but the devil's in the details.
yeah,
There are a lot of choices.
I'm fine with this. I'm fine with giving this to DLL, who are ready, who have the time and energy and handle all this, and I'm ready to get a blueprint for how to go forward. That's really what we're asking them for, right? It's a
Well,
blueprint.
But let's be clear, because I'm not clear.
Oh, I thought this was asking
No.
DLL.
Well, no, so we have S59.
Right.
We could pass that, I think, in a heartbeat, because the Senate
Yeah.
passed that yet. Do we want to add on with an appropriation? This is going to be through a consultant.
Right.
Do we want to add on this market study? How much value does it have? Clearly has some value to make us more educated you are ready for any questions, but is the report, which we don't have in front of us, is a fairly detailed report that we wrote last year from legislative council.
Right.
and fiscal. So that may be enough to, just to help staff this summer study committee, and if we need more, we could eventually find the money somewhere.
Right. Then I would just stick with this.
Just to the study.
Yeah. I would stick with the study and not do a full additional market analysis. For me, this is trying to get as close to a blueprint, a guessable point of action.
No, what we don't want to do is do nothing. We don't want to wind up going back next year and starting introducing a bill for study again.
No, and the only plus of doing additional market studies, I don't think we need to do them particularly at the moment, but I think we need as much data behind us going into the House discussion always on this issue.
Do you have any time frame for when you're going to finish your report this spring?
Uh,
I mean, if I'm going to try and sell this, even the study to the House, it'd be useful to have your report.
So this is, to me, the issue is how much we out as, dare I say, ammunition today for our discussions with the House.
I can comfortably say that the two most critical sections can be completed quickly.
It's a big undertaking for one person.
Well, the reason I can say that is that in their draft form, they're done. So I don't intend to add anything to them. There's nothing more to be said. Their utility, I don't know how useful they're going to be because it is a comprehensive breakdown of each of the state's statutory and regulatory frameworks, essentially a summary analysis of the types of models that inform those statutory frameworks, and then finally JFO's summary overview of revenue models that can be applied.
What's left?
The analysis of sports betting models, which is folded in. So I guess I should say there are three sections that could be presented quickly. The analysis of studies carried out by other states. And the reason that has taken quite a long time is that there's 3 states that have done these studies, but there's 1,100 pages that they did in those 3 studies that needs to be broken down. And then finally, any studies of the impacts on problem gaming in states with active sports betting markets. There's one, Iowa, but that is also a long and comprehensive analysis.
Could you get us, as soon as possible, a draft of the report, the sections you haven't completed, with just an annotation of what remains and what we can expect to see, and maybe some hyperlinks to the reports that you are going to review and synthesize? So if anybody wants to look at those, they can, but at least that we have that, and you can put draft, interim, whatever you want, get that to us and try and finish it up. I mean, I think April will probably be the key month in dealing with the House on this, but it'd be good to have at least that, which I don't even know if they're gonna agree to a study. You know, certainly help if it's shown to them that we invested a lot of time in this issue, and it's not something to be afraid of. So, any other thoughts or that you want to share with us at this point?
It's very small and random, but is the black market like a real term at this point? I mean, it just feels like a outdated term to use for illegal or illicit or kind of other
That's a good point. And a note about these criteria, the comprehensive and long market analysis that I brought up just a few moments ago came from Indiana, and these were the criteria that Indiana considered in their 5-year market analysis. So I will look into whether that's appropriate or, yeah, for sure.
Chris, do you want to say anything? Chris represents the draft. You represent both?
Sure. Good morning. It's now the Sports Betting Alliance that a number of operators have joined. We just saw the language this morning, sent it out for feedback. As always, we appreciate your attention to this. I think.
Identify yourself. For the record.
Sorry, it's Chris Rice from MMR, I'm an attorney here in Montpelier. I think, as always, our preference is to have done this yesterday, if not yesterday, 2 years ago, right? So we share the urgency that you've heard from others. We still appreciate very much the opportunity to talk to you about moving something more sooner, but I also understand where you are. So we'll take the language that we see today, give you some feedback on that quickly. Just saw the first 2 sections of the draft report this morning, so hopefully, as you guys had anticipated in that bill passed last year, we'll have an opportunity to provide some feedback to Tucker on that. And with that, stand ready to be the best partner that we can be for you guys as you move the issue forward.
Okay, so get us some thoughts by Monday. So I mean, the pro tem would like us to vote this bill out by Tuesday. Wednesday noon.
Wednesday noon. Taking
But
every possible.
it is possible that we might even vote it out earlier. Okay, so.
Turn around quickly.
Okay, good.
Appreciate it.
Thank you all. So we're on the floor at 11.
We have,
We have Mike Pichak here,
and Matt.
thank you.
10:30, but
Matt done.
Okay, so we have a couple of witnesses on the downtown and what was the other issue?
Entrepreneurial housing,
Oh,
which is downtown.
Okay. I want to make sure we get Mike Pichak in. This is a hard to get man. So, Commissioner, thank you for joining us. Welcome. I think you probably know what we wanted to hear your thoughts on. We're toying with an idea of doing something for income replacement for Omicron, COVID time loss. The model we're looking at is something similar to the essential person or the hazard pay bill, which I know you know a lot about. And Kevin wasn't able to tell us much about that, so we asked if you were available this morning and how that worked, what other impediments you might see in, somebody missed several days of work and didn't get a paycheck because they had to isolate. I know there's some decisions are retroactive, prospective, that whole thing, that may be a money issue, but in terms of administering something like this, do you have any thoughts or warnings for us?
Yeah, no, well, thank you very much for letting me talk about that. So, hazard pay was one of the highlights for me of our work that I've done as commissioner. Just was a really impactful program. We appreciated being able to administer it. We had a team at DFR, a volunteer team that probably included 20 people. 19 of which were probably full-time for a 4 or 5 week period. So that sort of was the amount of time and the amount of resources that we put toward this. We had, 3 different teams, 2 teams that were working on the employer side. We had a team that was working on the individual side. They, again, were staffed by really strong sort of team leaders. And then we had sort of a an individual that handled all of the individual outreach that we received and questions. We had an individual that handled the relationship with the employers that had questions as well. If we didn't have Salesforce, it would have been a considerably more challenging experience. But because we did have Salesforce, we were able to really leverage that technology, and it was really helpful for the team. They were able to organize themselves. I was able to get all the information along the way that I needed in terms of the progress we were making on the applications, and in terms of how much money was left in the program, how much we had expended. So if I remember, there were three kind of issues, I guess. The first one was the appropriation. Like, we were trying to balance, we wanted to get everyone their hazard pay, but there were, how much money we were allocated, continued to be sort of a concern, and we had to come back a couple of times to get more money. So that initial allocation was something that we had to spend a lot of time measuring and making sure that we didn't go over the appropriation. So just one item that we looked at closely. The other was the definition of essential person. I think, we had to, there was in the statute, they were prescribed, but then as we started to implement the program, we had individuals come to us with situations that seemed to fit but weren't expressed, or seemed to fit the intent of the law but weren't expressed, and we had to make some judgment decisions on that, which was fine. But there were other sections, there were other types of employees that it seemed like maybe they should have been included and they weren't. So the definition of who is included and who's not, that was something that we ended up spending a lot of time on, and certainly could provide more detail on that if you're interested. And then the third thing was really nothing to do with the statute or the program itself, but it was sort of wrangling the larger out-of-state employers to come to the table and participate in the program, which took a great deal of effort and attention from you, Chair Sorokin, and others in the Senate, and we were working the same angle on our side. Eventually, I think almost every single large employer came to the table, but that was another element. I'm not sure how you address that, but those were sort of the three, I would say, primary areas where we spent a lot of judgment and discretion trying to solve for those. Operationally, it was intense for those 5 weeks, but we were, with the technology and with the team that we had, we were able to handle it, I thought, in a pretty efficient way, and I was really, really proud of our team for doing so.
Well, that's great to know. I actually didn't realize that you said you had 15 volunteers working with you?
Yeah, at least. I think it was 15.
19 or 20, I thought.
Yeah.
So just, did they come to you, or do you ask somebody if anybody wants to help administer this program, or?
Yes, I put an email out to, there were three individuals that I thought would be really good at managing the teams. One from captive insurance, two from captive insurance, and one from banking. They were either directors or very senior level people in those divisions, and they're good managers, and they had volunteered on helping ACCD on the business grant program, and so they were familiar with Salesforce also. So I asked them, if they would help on this, and then we sent out a department-wide email asking for individuals who were interested in assisting and helping, and basically each one of those individuals had 4 or 3 people that they were sort of supervising, and then we had a lawyer that had to do a lot of the analysis around a company that maybe wasn't directly in the statutory language, but kind of fit the intent of the bill. The lawyer was helping with a lot of the policy framework at the beginning and how we implemented it. And then Jill Rickard helped out. Jill Rickard was really the point person on the program. So she did a tremendous job managing all of those individuals, working with me on those sort of policy issues that I mentioned, and also she was the main point of contact on a lot of the consumer and individual questions that came in, and she put a lot of time into that. So we managed that. We managed that well. We provided people the opportunity to get overtime during that period, so that they could either continue to do their job and volunteer on top of this, or they could decide if they were able to devote their full attention to this project for that 5-week period. And with the overtime, we were able to make sure that our department work didn't fall behind either. So that's sort of how we managed it from an employee perspective and also from a department perspective.
So at least in that program, with the computers and Salesforce, it wasn't that administratively complicated. An employer filled out a form online or something, and was there any follow-up in terms of making sure that they passed the money on to the worker? Was that part of the program?
Yeah, there was. We did. There was some upfront review that we did. So there were two elements that sort of were, I guess, compliance based, I would call it. One was at the onset, when a company would file an application, we have a database that allows us to sort of do a light background search, I would say, on a company. So we would put the company into the background search program, make sure that, they were incorporated, that they were an operating company, they had an address, and they didn't need to be in Vermont, but that they had an address, and that they were a legitimate corporation that was operating. So that was sort of the upfront compliance. And then on the back end, there were obviously, they had to have a certification that they paid the money, but there were sort of spot audits on certain payments as well, as I remember. And I think that was included in the report that was filed with the legislature. So those were sort of the three sort of mechanisms: the upfront company background check, the certification by the company, and then the sort of the spot examination or the spot audit. And then on the individual side, which were a lot of the payments, those were just payments made directly to individual employees. So in that situation, the company had to verify that they had worked the time and the hours and everything that was required for the program. And that was how the verification was made for the individuals.
I forget how that was distinguished between an employee being paid by the employer versus individuals. Was that for independent contractors, or?
It was if you were a former employee. So the time period that was covered was in that initial wave of the pandemic, but this program wasn't administered till the end of 2020 into 2021. So some of the employees were former employees. If I remember correctly, it was like, maybe there were 3,000 or 4,000 or 5,000 former employees, and at least for the part that we administered, there was a whole nother portion that related to the healthcare community.
Right.
Yeah. But to the part that we did, there were maybe 25,000 or so current employees and about 5,000 former employees. So that was sort of roughly the breakdown.
Do you have any idea what kind of penetration? It's a voluntary program for both the individuals, I guess, and for the employers. Do you have any idea what kind of penetration rate of the people who were eligible who ultimately took the money?
So I think that on the employer side, I think it was very high. I don't, when we looked at, the labor statistics and tried to get a sense of how many employees we thought would be eligible under the definitions, it was the number that actually applied. It was pretty close to that number. So I do think there was a pretty high response eventually, with the exception of some of those national companies that we had to, chat with and make sure they understood the program so that they did apply. The one other area, and I should have mentioned this, the other area that, we had a struggle with was on the individual side, not connecting with them, but actually getting them to follow through and get their payment. So if I said there were 5,000, I bet you only 3,000 ended up, being able to follow through and get their payment. And, and I think one of the things that would be helpful is if there was more explicit requirement, if the employer passed the contact information on to us and had, and in some instances we got, maybe a mailing address or an email address, but we didn't get a current number. I mean, it was just kind of a struggle getting the right contact information for those employees. And the employer might not have had the best information, but we did everything we could. We sent out a letter. We sent up a follow-up letter. We sent out an email. We ended up starting calling people, and we actually sent out text messages to people. And part of it was, you know, when you would call somebody and say that we have $2,000 for you, they were a little skeptical. So we had to sort of get through that as well. But even with all of those methods of trying to reach people, I think we only got to 60, 65, 70, at most 70% of those that were eligible on the individual side.
So Mike, I'm gonna have to cut you off, but before I do, because we have two more witnesses in only 15 minutes, I want to thank you for this. I mean, in some ways, at the end, we were a little bit of a tag team on this in terms of us putting public pressure on these big corporations, but you're a valuable source of information telling us what we should do best and how. I can say that now, but that was really good, and it was a really worthwhile effort. I'm glad you feel the same way. So thank you personally for all you do in that area. We have to say goodbye.
All right.
Michael, more to follow.
Thank you.
Sounds good. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Have a good day.
Do you want to suggest we get them next?
Sure. Hi, Stephanie and Matt. We have both of you. Why don't we start with Stephanie? And I know we have other representatives of the downtown organizations here. But why don't we start with Stephanie and go to Matt? Is that okay with both of you?
Just so clear, there are two different issues, right?
Yeah, there are two different issues.
So let's
Stephanie
hear-
is speaking
let's
to
hear-
downtown.
Let's just hear from one on each, okay?
Yep, we're hearing from Stephanie first. Great.
Great. Thank you very much for your time. I
If
appreciate
you could
it.
introduce yourself for the record, that would be great. Welcome.
Absolutely. Thank you. My name is Stephanie Bonin, and I'm the Executive Director of Downtown Brattleboro Alliance. And I'm here today on behalf of the Vermont Downtown Coalition, which represents all 23 of the state downtown organizations. So it was in 1998 that the legislature had the wisdom to establish the state statute that created the designated downtowns. And I bring this up and say wisdom because the work that you all entrust us to do is essential in ensuring the vitality of our downtowns. And there has never been a more poignant moment than right now. The pandemic has wreaked havoc, and we have our work cut out for us to ensure that downtowns come alive again. And we are the people behind those organizations that will deliver. So over the past 2 years, from Springfield to Wilmington, we have hosted Zoom gatherings to walk our businesses through the PPP paperwork and the state recovery grant checklists. From Newark to Bennington, we have supported independent contractors of the creative economy in understanding the expanded unemployment benefits during COVID. We were and we continue to be that trusted source. And we worked hand in hand, helping business owners, teaching new technology, our favorite word of pivoting, to figure out online shopping carts. We vision and we plan reopening events like art walks and food festivals that clearly communicate opening the door, reopening the door to our communities. And we've worked in partnership with the social sector, like Boys and Girls Club or the food shelves, distributing Everyone Eats meals, that program of purchasing to-go meals from restaurants, and that gave a real revenue stream that saved many of our restaurants. So there are businesses that would not be open today if it wasn't for the work of the downtown organizations. And the last 2 years have felt impossible and have really tested the resolve of our community. And keeping doors open, our businesses, our organizations, were absolutely never a given. I'm here today because this essential work in assisting our communities post-pandemic needs to be funded, and we ask you to support the proposed addition in front of you. I want to tell you a quick story. The other day, I walked into Amy's Bakery on Main Street in Brattleboro, and this is a bakery that has been around for decades. And they're one of those that shut the doors in March of 2020 and really struggled to figure out how to reopen. or if they could reopen, and through financial support. And, I believe half of it was just gumption. They reopened their doors about 7 days ago, and the community really cheered and rallied behind them. I walked in with my 2 daughters, and we went to the counter and picked out our cookies, and Amy, the owner, was there and rang me up. And I was truly overcome with emotion and said to her, "Welcome back." And the weight of those words were felt by both of us. And she handed me those cookies and said, "These are on me. Thank you for saving our town." And that is not unique. Stories can be heard from Chittenden County to Windsor County, from restaurant owners, massage therapists, because we are on the front lines of our economic engines of our state, of our downtowns. And we have always been the helm, the connectors, the cultivators, the visionaries, the cheerleaders. So the problem is, or for some, there's a misunderstanding, is that the organizations that work on behalf of those designated downtowns are not and have never been funded by state dollars. And we believe in the things that you all believe in. We have to have strong, vibrant downtowns to have strong, successful state economies. So the pandemic has broken us, and we pledge to work to make us whole again, but we need to be able to have those capacity dollars, and encourage you wholeheartedly to support the proposed addition in front of you to fund your downtown organizations. Thank you. Open to any questions.
Were you involved in the effort to pass the Better Places law last year?
Yes, all the downtown organizations, ACCD has kept us very involved, huge supporters, and thank you for passing that legislation. And we're all busy at work applying for the new round of funding that's occurring right now.
My understanding is that hasn't started yet, right? In terms of
Correct. They just opened the doors to that program, and so applications are coming in. And my understanding there's 2 that are gonna go online very soon from now, and that's a great example of dollars that are going to placemaking efforts and program efforts. And so, who are the people behind visioning that, building those collaborations, writing those grants, and making all of the program happen?
Right.
So wouldn't your organizations be eligible for some of that money?
Yeah, absolutely, they would be. And those dollars will go to the actual nuts and bolts of the program. So in other words, in Brattleboro, the project that we're envisioning is working with the town to reimagine a parking lot to turn it into a green space. None of those dollars are going to my work of reimagining that. None of those dollars are going to building a partnership of the business owners who are going to be on the fence of whether parking is more essential than gathering spaces. So it is going to, hard costs.
Right.
I guess one other question. Last year, I think we gave out a lot of money to chambers of commerce. I think we were getting like $60,000 each, and there were 12 of them. Were you aware of that, and did you question why you didn't qualify for that money? ACCD,
I was
tourism. The Department of Tourism gave that money out to the chambers. Sounds like something that you could have qualified for also.
I was not aware of that. We are definitely not chambers and we are not membership-based organizations. I'm glad that the chambers got the support, seeing that they rely on their membership. And if the businesses were not having revenue, then it was hard to justify paying for those memberships. I can see that.
So, yeah, Stephanie, it's lovely to finally meet you a little bit. You aren't seeing me face to face, but I'm getting to see you. For me, at this moment, the reason it's important to further support our downtown organizations is the huge amount of focus that's being driven into our downtowns with ARPA money and ARPA investments in housing and in economic recovery. So Well, my understanding is that that is additional expectation, additional time, energy, and helping your downtowns navigate all this huge infusion. And that's what I'm understanding this $485,000 ask is really for, is that at this moment in time for your, with the additional expectation on your time and energy and work, that all the work we're creating and the programs we're creating around this table, this is giving you additional resources to actually help us make that work happen. Is that correct? Just disappeared. Can some?
Thank you for saying that so well. And I was hoping to illustrate that in my descriptions of sitting step side doing the paperwork for PPP. This is a moment where business owners, this is not something that they navigate normally. But this is, you don't open up a coffee shop in downtown and expect to need to apply for grants. And so absolutely, like every sector, we're being tested to our limit and being handed a workload that we've never done before. And we're doing it well, but yes, in order to navigate all of those programs, that is asking us to do far greater and far more than we've ever done before.
Where do you get your money from now?
So the 23 organizations are a mishmash, a smorgasbord of how they get their funding. Some of us will rely solely on individual donations. Some of us heavy on grants. People like me, I have a special assessment tax that's levied on the property owners that is about 40% of my budget. Every single organization is different, and the range of budget size would probably be the most surprising to you. From a $30,000 organization to a $150,000 budgeted organization. It's quite a range.
Wow, so the downtown organizations are not funded by one, at least some seed foundational money is nothing. That's something we should fix.
The majority of them do not have like you just described, seed money that is consistent every year. The vast majority of them do not.
Well, we should get on that because they're invaluable and they are key partners, in my experience, key partners in helping us make all the programs we're trying to creatively funnel into our communities happen. So anyway, thank you. This is helpful. This is good.
Do you want to go on to Matt or is it too late?
No, I think we have to be on the floor in 5 minutes, and I hate to ask this, but I think we should finish with Stephanie and Matt. And Bob Flint. I hate to do this, but Matt, you are a little more understanding as a former senator.
Yeah.
We're going to reconvene, I think, on Tuesday. And is it possible that you might be able to join us on Tuesday in the morning?
I don't know, Senator. I'm sorry that next week we have all-day retreats. Anyway, I'm happy to talk to the scheduler and see. I appreciate the.
I don't want to rush you because you're too special to rush, and your ask is actually too important to us.
Okay. All right. So someone will be in touch about timeline for Tuesday because I'm going to have to. I'll have to cancel some things. So, but happy to do it. So I just need to know sooner rather than later what time would work.
We apologize.
That's right.
We'll let you know by the end of the day.
That would be great. Thank you, Mr.
Thank
Chairman.
you, Matt. Sorry.
Apologize.
No worries. Good luck on the floor.
Okay.